All right, we're live.
All right. Okay, guys. So here we are. Set review number 5. This time we are going to be going over the Wild Shard. Um, if you guys want to follow along with us on your own computers, you can poke around. We're on hex-datamine.com. I will throw up a link in the chat. Um, so if there's any new people here tonight, what we're doing is we're going through this at alphabetically and discussing the card's potentials for draft and constructed play in PvP. We have it sorted by wild and PvP since we're only looking at the wild set and with focus on PvP. I am Pun Intelligent. With me is Jansen, our master of puppets. We have our main card reviewers, Baron and Wretched.
Hello.
So,
Hello.
the first card we're going to be looking at is Ambershire Instigator. Ambershire Instigator is a 5-mana casting cost with 2 Wild Threshold. It's a 2/4 troop with Crush and Rage 2.
So this guy isn't actually too bad. 5 is not too unreasonable for a deck to get to, and he gets pretty powerful pretty quickly. 4 toughness is actually really, really big. Reds really can't deal with this without sacrificing at least 2 cards. And if you can get a couple of attacks, then he starts getting very scary. And Crush is really good in this guy since his power goes up. Given that he's not great against control decks, he does cost a lot and doesn't do a lot when he comes into play to start. But I think against the sort of more mid-rangey or fast aggro, which really isn't that fast in Hex, if you can survive a little bit, this guy's going to start winning the game for you pretty soon.
Yeah, this guy is pretty good, despite his original stats on paper. He's a 4/4 on the first attack. In Limited, he's going to be pretty good. Being a 4/4, there's not many creatures that are going to deal with him in combat, so it's going to take a guy plus a removal spell or a combat trick most of the time. And then on his second attack, he's just crazy big. Constructed, I don't know if he's going to get there. For 1 more mana, you have stuff like Jadim, which we'll talk about later. And he doesn't do anything other than attack. So draft, I think he's going to be very solid, probably a high pick if you're in green already. And constructed, probably not, but he could be.
Yeah, I've actually played a couple decks with him in Constructed, and I think he's a pretty useful guy. Like Baron said, a lot of decks have to throw 2 cards at it just to get rid of it, and it gets pretty scary pretty quick with the Crush. I so far don't know if I've even played him in a draft, but I've played against them, and it's a pretty scary card once it's got 1 or 2 attacks on it. The next card on here is a Battle Hopper, so we're gonna skip that. In case any of you don't know, it's just a 0/1 chin hair creature, but it's not actually a real card. It's just a token that's spawned by a bunch of other cards. After that is Boulder Brute. Boulder Brute is another 5-mana casting cost 2 Wild Threshold card. This one is a 4/4 creature with a socketable miner.
Alright, so this card was kind of one of their original, you can do different things with this card. I want to talk about it mostly for Limited. So it's just base stats is a 4/4 for 5, which is fine. That's a fine creature on its own. In addition, with a socket, you can make it either a 5/5 for 5 or a 4/4 for 4. I think those are actually even both in green.
Yep.
Yeah, so basically even on color, it's a bigger guy or a cheaper guy. Either of those is great. A 5/4 for 5 and a 4/4 for 4 are both playable Limited cards. Now, in Constructed, there isn't really a lot you can do with this guy. You can make him like an arrow momentum, like make him flight, or make him like a hasty guy, but either way, just a 4/4 for 5 is really not good enough base for Constructed play, unless you do something particularly special, and he doesn't. But for Limited, I think he's pretty good. I'd mostly play him with a 4/4 for 4, which is just a great card in Limited.
Yeah, pretty much agree with what Baron said there. Limited, he's very good. Constructed, it's unfortunate that he has a minor socket. Like, being a more expensive card to cast at 5, I would think that maybe he'd be a major socket. But the minor gems are not terribly appealing on this guy. I'd be very happy to draft him. But for constructed, again, I think we're going to be looking for something a little more powerful, like something that has a little more effect on the board. Yeah, not too much more to say on this guy.
He also suffers from the Jadim problem, which is 1 more mana for a sweet rare. Which is, often the case for commons and constructed.
Yeah, just completely outclassed by Jadim.
Yeah, I agree. He's a solid card in limited, and from my experience so far, he tends to be there in fairly late rounds of the draft. So it's a pretty big, solid creature that you can often pick up, like round 6 even. So you can beef up your deck a little bit, but yeah, in constructed, a little lacking. The next card is Briar Legion. Briar Legion is a 3 mana casting cost with 1 wild threshold. He's a 2/2 to start, but when he enters play, each Briar Legion that you control in all areas gets permanent +1/+1. So it gets pretty big pretty quick, and all of them do as well.
So this guy, though he looks like only a 2/2 for 3, is actually a 3/3 for 3, since he will pump himself. And every successive Briar Legion will pump themselves as well. I thought this card was actually really, really good when I first looked at the set. I've since been less impressed with 3/3s for 3. I don't really know why they're not performing as I expect. But in a vacuum, I think this guy is still pretty good in the mid-rangey green decks. Even in limited, where you're only maybe going to get 1 or maybe 2 Briar Legions, it's still fine. A 3/3 for 3 is on curve for limited for sure. And constructed as a 4/of, I think that he can get there if you draw 2 of them. But a 3/3 for 3 is surprisingly not as good as I'd like, except against the red decks. A 3 toughness guy is great against red, so keep that in mind. But against other colors, it's not as impressive.
Yeah, it's kind of strange that there are other possible 3/3s, 4/3 in green. In limited, I could see definitely trying to go for Briar Legion early. Like, say you open a pack that's not particularly exciting, the rare's not too good, and there's no removal spell. Like, it's possible that you may want to jump on Briar Legion and try to pick up as many as possible. That way, you might end up with 3 or 4 if you're lucky, and then that would be pretty sweet. Limited, there are other cards in green even that at 3 cost are just better than this guy. And the fact that you can only have 4 in a 60-card deck means you're not going to reliably play multiples to where he's, 4/4 or 5/5 for only 3 mana. Okay in limited, outclassing constructed. And I think there's even better 3-drops for limited.
Yeah, he's handy if you can pick up a few of them in a draft, which not particularly likely, but it could happen. If you're just grabbing at every green card and then you look in and you see, hey, I've grabbed 3 or 4 Briar Legions, I'd throw them in my deck then for limited. Maybe even without, because it's still a solid creature. Yeah, I don't know how I would use that guy in constructed. Just something not quite there. So moving on, the next card is Bucktooth Commander. Bucktooth Commander is another 3 mana casting cost creature, but this one has 2 wild threshold. He is a 2/2 and gives all other Shinhair that you control a 1/1 for attack and defense.
So this guy is basically the backbone of the Shinhair deck. He gives all your Shinhair +1/+1, which gives them a power since they start with 0, and thus can actually do something. If the Shinhair deck is good, this guy will be an automatic 4/of. If the Shinhair deck is not good enough, this guy is basically unplayable. For limited, it's exactly the same. If you can draft the Shinhair cards, this guy is great. Otherwise, you just Grey Ogre that costs double mana. It's pretty weak. So really, it's dependent on other Shinhair and as well as the metagame. Even if the Shinhair deck is good sometimes, it might not be playable.
Yeah. I think this will probably see play in the constructed Shinhair deck, just because, I mean, if there's going to be a Shinhair deck, it's probably going to make a lot of tokens. It'll have the champion that makes tokens. It'll probably run the Glimmer or Runts of the Litter, maybe Wretched Brood. So if you're making tokens, this guy gets good. In Limited, I think you're going to already have to be on the Shinhair plan, like already have the guy that sacrifices to get bigger, or the guy that when another Shinhair dies, he gets bigger, because like those cards are okay by themselves, whereas this guy, he's only worthwhile if you have other Shinhairs. So if you're already in Shinhair, go for him. Don't first pick this and try to go for the Shinhair deck, because if you get cut, it's a completely wasted pick.
Yeah, same thoughts. I think he's not too useful on his own. But I have seen people use him pretty effectively in drafts with even just a couple of like Battle Hoppers or Runts of the Litter cards and the champion that spawns Shinhair. I was actually shocked a couple times against one guy who, I don't know, it seemed like every game he had a Bucktooth Commander and 2 Runts of the Litter in his hand, which is actually pretty annoying.
Yeah, if you have a good number of Shinhair, he's definitely a high pick for Limited. But you have to already have the Shinhair to make him worthy of a pick, I think.
Yep. So moving on to Chlorophilia, the first spell we've gotten to in WoW. This is a 3-mana casting cost, 2 wild threshold basic action that creates 2 wild sources and plays them. The wording is pretty interesting, but it ends up helping out because it lets you, as far as we know, get charges, and your Wild Root Dancer can buff creatures when these come into play. They do come into play tapped, though, so you don't gain your temporary resource this turn.
So actually, looking at this card again, it doesn't actually pull them out of your deck like I thought it probably would. It just creates them, so it doesn't actually thin your deck. Notice also this is a double wild threshold, so it's hard to splash, especially when I play it on turn 3. It's a little bit awkward. However, it does create 2 sources for only 3 mana, which is really good. This card in Magic would cost 4, so that's pretty powerful. I think if you want to go big, this gives you a turn 4 Jadim or other sweet 6-drop, which is pretty powerful in this format. I think this card definitely has a place in a go big constructed deck. For Limited, I don't think it's that great because usually when I play multiple colors and this thing can't fix you and costs double wild to start. I'm not sure I'd play it in Limited even though it can't accelerate you. But in constructed, I think it's definitely going to have a home in green control, like that big mana or other sort of rampy style decks.
Yeah, I think this card is going to be a critical component for a few green decks, like the Eye of Creation deck, maybe some control decks. Getting +2 mana on your next turn for only 3 cost is really good. In Magic, like Baron said, it's usually 4 mana for something like this. So being 3 makes me like this card. However, in Limited, it's just, I'm not sure if there's a whole lot of things that you want to ramp to by, picking this as opposed to a powerful trooper removal spell. Yeah, I mean, good and constructed. Hard to find a reason to run this in Limited.
Yeah, pretty much the same thoughts here. I've got it in one of my green constructed decks. There it works. And then Limited, lackluster. So moving on to Concubunny. Concubunny is a 3-mana casting cost, 1 wild threshold troop. And you can pay 1 mana, exhaust her, and exhaust another Shinhair you control to create a Battle Hopper. Back to those 0/1 guys. And this card also is a 0/1 itself.